All right, lecture 8C. I want to mention some other land where it's actually kind of rough, a little bit rougher topographically. This is in southern Indiana, next to near the Ohio River. You can see again, more elevation changes near the Ohio River here. And so this is other land that's in southern Indiana. Southern Indiana has it's quite hilly, and it is a little bit rougher topographically in southern Indiana. And actually quite scenic in a lot of ways. There's a number of different areas where you can find some good hills. There's a fair amount of water, or even some waterfalls in some portions of southern Indiana. Now, more central Indiana is going to be quite a bit flatter, and then even northern Indiana is going to be, somewhat rolling hills in northern Indiana. But here in the southern part of the state, not far from the Ohio River, a little bit steeper, rougher topographically. Southern Illinois as well. This is in the most people don't, they think of Illinois, they think, flatter area with a lot of cornfields. And much of that is true, of course, but here we have a section of southern Illinois, right near the southern tip. It's actually part of a national forest area, and actually some, a number of scenic hills and even some hiking, backpacking opportunities here in southern Illinois. And, some interesting rock formations, and, this national forest area that's in the southern, right in the southern part of Illinois. And the reason why we have some, a little bit rougher topographically in southern Indiana and southern Illinois is that these are areas that were not covered by the big ice sheets during the Ice Age. So we had the huge ice sheets that went as far south as St. Louis during the Ice Age. And of course, most of the Great Lakes and Corn Belt region was covered by these huge ice sheets, and had a lot of glacial activity. Of course, the Great Lakes themselves were carved out by by glacial activity. But areas that were not heavily glaciated, such as like in the the Allegheny Plateau of eastern and southeastern Ohio, southern Indiana, southern Illinois, these areas, were the glaciers didn't. The big ice sheets, the huge ice sheets during the Ice Age, which ended, this whole Ice Age ended about 10,000 years ago, as I've mentioned before, did not cover those areas, and so therefore they have a little bit rougher topographically. The areas that the ice sheets did cover tend to be a little bit flatter, or rolling hills in some of those areas. So let me talk about an area here. Actually, I'm going to go back here. There's an area that's parts of 4 states, part of southwestern Wisconsin, northwestern Illinois, a little bit of northwestern Illinois, a fairly good portion of northeastern Iowa, and part of southeastern Minnesota, parts of 4 states right in here. This is an area that was not covered by glaciers. Most of the rest of the region were, and most of the rest of these states were covered by the big ice sheet. But here we have an area that's parts of these 4 states that was not covered by glaciers, and that's really kind of interesting. So here we have these 4 states, part of southwestern Wisconsin, a little bit of northwestern Illinois, northeastern Iowa, and southeastern Minnesota. Right in through here, this area was not covered by ice sheets. And this area is known as the driftless area. Driftless area. This was not covered by the big glacial ice sheets. The driftless area. And it's a hillier area that is part of the Great Lakes and Corn Belt region. Actually, quite a few elevation changes. A lot of, sort of hillier, more so than some of the surrounding land. The driftless area is what this is referred to, the parts of these 4 states that was not covered by the big ice sheets. So going back to this map here, you can see this section. So the driftless area, kind of unique and interesting area of North America. So again, it's a hillier zone. Again, this is from southwestern Wisconsin right in through here. Now there's farming, especially you get up a little higher in some of these plateau areas. It's a little bit higher, and it's interesting terrain that we see in this area. more of the driftless area. Still quite heavily agricultural, and a lot of farming in this area. The driftless area, and quite scenic in a lot of ways. A combination of both. Again, these are mostly from southwestern Wisconsin. Combination of plowed farmland and trees, especially in the steeper slopes, the hillier slopes, trees, and it adds a lot to the scenery in this area. So there's actually a lot more variety than many people realize. Many people think this area is quite monotonous, and it is true that there are certain areas within the Great Lakes and Corn Belt that may be perhaps a bit monotonous, but this area actually has quite a bit of variety. So we have there's even a number of towns that are part of, that you can see within the driftless area. This is near Galena, Illinois, and a little bit of elevation changes found in here. This is in Iowa, part of right there in the north, just not very just across the Mississippi River, not very far away from southwestern Wisconsin. Here we are in northeastern Iowa. More of northeastern Iowa, again that driftless area, and you can see that's there's actually a fair amount of elevation change here. Most people would not expect to see this in Iowa. All right, moving away from the driftless area, let's go into areas that were impacted by glaciation, and areas that did have a big amount of glacial activity that did carve out a number of different places. One of these is in central Wisconsin, so it's not far from the driftless area, but it's away from it, kind of in the central part of the state. It's called the Wisconsin Dells, and this is north of Madison. This is along the Wisconsin River to the north of Madison. This area was carved out by glaciation, and there's a number of features, water features and some rock features that have impact of glacial activity. And this is to the north of Madison, kind of in the central part of the state, the Wisconsin Dells. And this is actually a very scenic area along the Wisconsin River. It's not right next to Madison, it's some distance north of Madison, but it's a very scenic area along the Wisconsin River. Numerous bluffs and cliffs, and quite scenic in much of this area. And a number of tourists come here, especially in the summer months. In the winter months, it's much of this river freezes over, and it's quite cold. Although there is winter tourism here, but the number of these bluffs and cliffs here, quite scenic. The Wisconsin Dells. However, the Wisconsin Dells has become, in a lot of ways, kind of over touristy, because along a section of the Wisconsin River, there's also some lakes nearby, and the Wisconsin Dells, again, it's quite scenic, but it's become kind of almost over touristy. A number of golf courses have been put in. There's water parks. There's even amusement parks. Lots of hotels and resorts. And it's actually become a really big popular place. And and to some it's kind of become sort of over touristy, the Wisconsin Dells. People came originally to see the natural scenery, but not necessarily to go to an amusement park or to a water park or play around a golf. But all kinds of different water parks in here. Summer tourism, of course, but it is a popular place. The Wisconsin Dells, again, kind of the central part of the state, and central and even up into more northern Wisconsin, we actually have a fair amount of terrain that's a lot of elevation changes here. Actually, some of this is starting to stretch into the Canadian Shield. Again, much of northern Wisconsin is part of the Canadian Shield. But this is the highest point in Wisconsin, Rib Mountain, and in the winter, of course, there's ski resorts, some good-sized ski hills here in the central. Actually, it's north of the Wisconsin Dells, and so you're starting to get closer into northern Wisconsin here. Rib Mountain, and this is that same mountain, but viewed from a little bit further away. Um, but there's also areas that are flatter. You know, you're still kind of the margins of the interior plains. Here we're kind of on the margins of the Canadian Shield and the interior plains, so we're kind of central, but you know, approaching more northern Wisconsin. But there's still a lot of the interior plains, so quite a bit of agriculture, but also some significant hills in the region. And then we get to the Great Lakes. Now, again, much of northern Minnesota, northern Wisconsin are part of the Canadian Shield, and we get into the Great Lakes. The biggest of them is Lake Superior, which also has a reputation for having, you know, really clear water, a pretty rough coastline, and much of the Lake Superior shoreline, and quite scenic. Again, these are, you know, the 5 major Great Lakes were carved out during the Ice Age, as well as many other lakes as well. More of the Lake Superior shoreline, quite scenic, and pretty steep. A lot of cliffs along the Lake Superior shoreline. Not everywhere along the Lake Superior shoreline, but a lot of places you can see this. And so Lake Superior is the biggest one. Actually, Lake Superior is the biggest lake in the world by surface area, not by volume. There's lakes that are quite a bit deeper that have bigger volume of water, but in terms of surface area, Lake Superior is the largest freshwater lake. The reason I say freshwater is because the Caspian Sea in Central Asia is somewhat brackish or salty because it's an interior or internal drainage basin. But Lake Superior is the largest freshwater lake, and there's an old saying that, you know, you could dip a cup into Lake Superior and drink the water out of it. It was so clear. I'm not sure I would do that. I don't think that's quite the case anymore, but nonetheless, it does have a reputation for having a higher water quality and better water than the other Great Lakes. Certainly much more than Lake Erie, which is the shallowest and has had a reputation in the past, although it's much cleaner now. It has had a reputation in the past of being somewhat polluted, being adjacent to some of the industrial areas along Lake Erie. But Lake Superior, a big lake and quite scenic along much of its shoreline. Not everywhere is going to have a lot of cliffs, but quite a few places do. The Great Lakes are an entire hydrologic system. They flow. One lake flows into the other, and it's a whole system that flows. You know, Lake Superior, the highest and the furthest to the west, and they do flow to the adjacent lakes as they go, I guess you could say, sort of downstream, as it were, and eventually out to the St. Lawrence River and out to the Atlantic. So it's an entire system that does flow. So Lake Superior, the highest in elevation, it's a 21-foot drop-off to both lakes Michigan and Huron. Lake Michigan and Huron are the same, and then there's a slight drop-off to Lake Erie, and then there's the big drop-off to Lake Ontario. So in order to go from Superior towards Lake Huron, shipping was enhanced by the construction of what are called the Soo Locks. So before it was kind of a river that flowed between Lake Superior and Lake Huron. Lake Michigan is kind of kind of attaches, I guess you could say, to this area, but it's really kind of separate from this major flow here. I mean, it does connect, but the major flow here, if you're going to, in terms of the Great Lakes flowing from Lake Superior into Lake Huron, 21-foot drop-off. Historically, there was some rapids, some white water on here. So the U.S. and Canadian governments got together and decided to enhance shipping in the Great Lakes, and in order to do that, they needed to build some waterways to help. I mean, not really build the waterways. The water was already flowing between the Great Lakes, but to help enhance the shipping and to help the ships, these bigger ships, actually a lot of big iron boats, to bypass the rapids. And so these, what are called the Soo Locks, were constructed at Sault Ste. Marie. So here is the Soo Locks, and again, it's a river here. This is the connection between Lake Superior and Lake Huron. The natural waterway was this kind of whitewater river, sort of whitewater, some fast-moving rapids in here, which you can see in the central part of the photo. And then they built these locks here to help the barges, these big ships, a lot of these big boats that carry iron from the northern Minnesota iron mines to the industrial areas of near Lake Erie. And so these locks were constructed to help enhance the shipping along, within the Great Lakes. So this is, it looks kind of, it's kind of a major river right in here at Sault Ste. Marie. There's a Sault Ste. Marie on both sides of the international boundary. And so Lake Superior on the left, Huron or on the right. Again, Mission does connect to the system, but Huron and Michigan are the same elevation, so the water does connect through here. In fact, there's a big, the Mackinac Strait, there's a big freeway bridge on Interstate 75 that crosses over the Mackinac Bridge. But up in here, this is the Sioux, or the Sioux Locks. This is that connection, basically that river connection. And again, that 21-foot drop-off. These locks help enhance and help expedite shipping in the Great Lakes. And again, there's here's the Mackinac Strait, where there's the big freeway bridge. That's where Michigan connects into Huron. But up in here, Lake Superior and the big iron boats coming from the northern Minnesota iron mines, coming through the Sioux Locks right in here, near the city of Sault Ste. Marie. Again, Sault Ste. Marie in Ontario, one in Michigan, and coming through here. Again, this is shared between the U.S. and Canada, the Sioux Locks. In fact, it's right on the border. The Great Lakes are, Michigan is entirely within the U.S., but the other 4 Great Lakes are all shared between the U.S. and Canada. By the way, let me just mention a couple things about the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So much of this area up in here, we call this the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, which is separated by the Straits of Mackinac from the main part of Michigan. But this Upper Peninsula of Michigan, known for some really harsh winters and long winters. And so this is an example of a town in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan during the wintertime. Heavy snow here. You get the big storm systems. Also, they pick up a lot of moisture off Lake Superior and dump it as snow in some of these cities. So I don't know if you can see here, but on the right, these are people who, instead of driving their cars to come to town, they're snowmobiles. So there's snowmobiles parked in front of these shops and parked in front of these buildings here in this town in Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Occasionally, snow is extremely heavy in the UP, as they call it, or the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Can be pretty and can kind of shut down an area for a period of time. But people are used to it. In fact, there's stories of people who commute to work by cross-country skiing, or just using snowmobile or get around by skis. Another thing that's interesting, and this is more commonly found in the winter, are the Northern Lights, which you can see in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and of course in Ontario and places that are further to the north. Occasionally, very, very rarely, the Northern Lights can be seen as far south as Chicago. That's rare. But generally, the further north you are, the better chances you have. So northern Minnesota, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, parts of northern Wisconsin, into Ontario, lots of Ontario. In the winter months, tends to be more common in the winter months. You can see the Northern Lights. So that's the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So there's a 9-foot drop off from Lake Huron to Lake Erie. Now here it's not enhanced by canals, but there's a river that leads into this smaller lake, not considered one of the 5 Great Lakes, but still a big lake, Lake St. Clair, which then leads into the Detroit River. And so Detroit and Windsor, this binational metropolis, is right on this Great Lakes, waterway. And again, this is really a whole system as it flows towards the east. So here's Detroit, and of course Windsor, which is a fairly good-sized city, not as big as Detroit, but a good-sized city in Ontario. Again, from Lake St. Clair, you got the Detroit River. Again, this is still the flow as the Great Lakes are flowing from Superior, Michigan, and Huron, and the water is flowing towards Lake Erie. So, again, as I mentioned before a little bit, northern Minnesota has a number of iron mines, and iron, of course, major product used in the steel industry. So iron was mined in this region, brought to Lake Superior, particularly the cities of Duluth and Superior, Wisconsin, where and the iron was then picked up by these big iron boats. And again, water's it's not fast necessarily, but it's the cheapest form of transportation. So the most efficient way to get the iron from here, from northern Minnesota, to the major industrial areas in like places like Pittsburgh and Cleveland was to ship it by the Great Lakes. The reason why the industrial area, the major steel manufacturing places were in Pittsburgh or Youngstown, Ohio, or Cleveland, is because that's much closer to the coal, the Appalachian coal. And coal, it was inland, it's heavier, it's bulky, harder to transport. So the steel industry tended to be located. This is back when the steel industry was really kind of humming. Now the steel industry in the U.S. is, I wouldn't say at a standstill, but certainly much reduced in terms of its productivity, and the amount of steel that's produced in the U.S. is much, much, much smaller than it used to be. Pittsburgh used to have more than 50 operating steel mills, hence the name the Steelers. That's not the case anymore. In fact, I don't even know, I think there's maybe one is still operating, perhaps, is at all within that area. So iron from northern Minnesota, what we call the Hibbing area, the Mesabi Range, and the Vermilion Range, the town of Hibbing, major iron mining town up in northern Minnesota. And again, you're part of the Canadian Shield, and so mining is a big part of the Canadian Shield. And so the iron was brought to cities like Duluth or Superior, Wisconsin, Duluth, Minnesota, Superior, Wisconsin. And then the iron boats picked it up here. And these iron boats were big. And they took it to places like Cleveland, where it was then used in the iron was used in steel industries in that area: Cleveland, Youngstown, Pittsburgh. Sometimes they had to be shipped somewhat inland. Again, the coal was inland, and so the steel industry, much of the U.S. steel industry, located in this area historically. It was a great location in a lot of ways for the steel industry because not only was it close to their resources, and you could use the Great Lakes shipping for the iron, but it was also kind of in the middle of their market. Think about where Pittsburgh's located. You've got major cities of Megalopolis to the east. You've got other major cities like Detroit, which use a lot of the steel in the auto industry, or Chicago. So a lot of other major cities to the west. So in a lot of ways, Pittsburgh was a perfect place for the steel industry because of being in the center of its major market. These are what we call locational dependent industries that are, where you locate is very, very crucial and very, very key. Nowadays, with high tech and service-based economy, industries can kind of locate wherever they want. A lot of it, not every industry, but a lot of industries, especially some of the high tech and a lot of the service-based type of firms, which aren't really industries, really service economy. And industry and services are really, economically speaking, we kind of keep them separate. They can locate anywhere they want. But this was an industry, the U.S. steel industry. And this is in the 1920s, 1930s, all the way really through the 80s and 90s. In the late 70s and 80s, it started to really decline a lot. Foreign competition, places steel made in South Korea or Brazil or China, began to really undercut American steel. And so we have far, far less production of steel in the U.S. Compared to what was like previously. But Great Lakes shipping did play a role for a number of years, and still does to a certain extent, not much anymore, but Great Lakes shipping of the iron boats. And these are some of the big iron boats that went through Great Lakes shipping, went from Lake Superior, through the Sioux Locks, through Lake Huron, past Detroit, into Lake Erie. Great Lakes shipping on these iron boats was quite significant for a number of years, and it still is to a certain extent. This was a famous or infamous ship, the Edmund Fitzgerald. This was an iron boat that loaded up at Superior, Wisconsin, with 26,000 tons. And I know that because of the song. 26,000 tons of iron ore loaded on the Edmund Fitzgerald. And in 1976, that iron boat sunk at the far eastern end of Lake Superior, almost reached the Sioux Locks, not quite. A major storm struck in November, and the Edmund Fitzgerald sunk. 26 men on board, all perished, and 29 men all perished as the Edmund Fitzgerald sunk with its load of iron ore in the far eastern side of Lake Superior, with this big November storm and huge waves in Lake Superior. it sunk. And the reason why this is quite well known is because there was a famous song by Gordon Lightfoot, who was a Canadian balladeer, kind of a famous crooner in Canada, sung about the song is called "The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald," and it's all based on a true story. Anyway, this is a major iron boat, or was. All right, but there is still some shipping on the Great Lakes. Okay, so Lake Erie, 30 feet lower than Lake Superior. Again, this whole system flows. And then we have the really big drop off from Lake Erie to Lake Ontario. 200 and more than 300-foot drop off. Well, that is Niagara Falls. The natural flow from Lake Erie to Ontario is Niagara Falls, and the famous falls. It's all the water coming out of Lake Erie that's then going into Lake Ontario. So the big question is, okay, if you're going to use the Great Lakes for shipping, instead of just ending at Lake Erie and having this, shipping between Superior and Erie, how about shipping out to Lake Ontario, and then from Ontario out towards Montreal and out to the Atlantic? Well, canals have been built to bypass that big drop-off at Niagara Falls. And so we have what's called the Welland Canal, which connects between Lake Erie to Lake Ontario. And the Welland Canal, which is actually has a series of different locks, because again, it's a pretty big drop-off, here from Erie to Ontario. And then there's even some more locks on the lower St. Lawrence as you go from Kingston, because Hamilton's at one end of Lake Ontario, Kingston's at the other end. As you go from Kingston and head up, head downstream, you head downstream towards Montreal, and there's some more canals, and then, but it is it is now open for shipping for barges. It can go all the way from the far western end of Lake Superior, all the way, through the Great Lakes, through the Sioux Canal or the Sioux Locks, through the Welland Canal, and through other canals that are, and other locks, I should say, not necessarily canals, but through other locks that are found along the lower St. Lawrence. And you can go all the way from western end of Lake Superior with barges all the way out to the open Atlantic Ocean, all the way through the St. Lawrence. And the U.S. and the Canadian governments cooperated very closely. This is a great example of international cooperation as they work good together in this whole St. Lawrence seaway system. So even though the Welland Canal is entirely within Canada, it's all within Ontario. The U.S. government did help in the funding of this, because again, a number of U.S. barges use this and use the whole St. Lawrence seaway system. So here's the Welland Canal. Again, Niagara Falls is over here. That's the main natural flow between Lake Erie to Ontario. So the Welland Canal has a number of different locks, especially in its northern portion, a number of locks. This is all contained within Ontario, near the city of St. Catharines. Buffalo's not very far away, Buffalo, New York. Of course, you got the Niagara Falls region. But here along the Welland Canal, a number of different locks. And because there's so much elevation change, you can see the different locks, on the elevation changes on the Welland Canal, that you need these different locks. But a number of not just barges, but actually some decent sized ships can actually cut through the Welland Canal and actually use this whole St. Lawrence seaway system. You can see the different elevation changes on the locks along the Welland Canal. And anyway, more to say about the Great Lakes, this entire interesting hydrologic system that we see here.